Alright, in this presentation we're going to discuss how to graph a linear inequality. So graphing a linear inequality is going to be very similar to graphing a linear equation, but just instead of having an equal sign, we're going to have one of the inequality symbols. So our rules for graphing a linear inequality are going to be, like stated before, exactly the same for graphing an equation, except for we have two additional steps. One of those steps, we have to determine what type of line we're going to actually use to make our graph. Alright, so now before we always used a solid line, now we could actually have a dotted line, and we're going to use a dotted line if the inequality symbol is a greater than or a less than symbol. Alright, so if we see greater than or less than, we'll use a dotted line. If it's one of the equal to inequalities, we'll use a solid line. The other new aspect to an inequality is there's going to be shading. So after we make this graph, alright, we're actually going to do a shading. And we're going to either shade above the given line or below the given line. And an easy way to remember this, if something is greater, that usually means it's more or above something. So therefore, if it's greater than or equal to or greater than, we'll shade above the line. An example of that would be if this is our coordinate plane and here's our line, this would be shading above the line. Alright, so that would be an example of a greater than inequality symbol. We could also shade below then if it's less than or equal to or less than. If we do a similar example, well, let's use a solid line this time. So now shading below would look like this. And by this picture, I would know that the inequality symbol would be less than or equal to. It's going to be an equal to because the line is solid. It's going to be less than because it's shaded below. So therefore, it's less than or equal to. We're going to go ahead and take a minute then to work through three examples. All right? The first two examples, you'll see they're already written in slope-intercept form. The last example, all right, slight twist, it's written in standard form. So we're going to have an additional step there before we graph it. So let's go ahead and go along with the graphic actually. Right there. Good. So our first inequality is already in slope-intercept form. So I know my slope is 2/3 and my y-intercept's 4. So to go ahead and graph this, I'll start off with my y-intercept of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then a slope of 2/3, I'll go up 2 over 3, up 2 over 3. As long as I have 3 points to suffice for graphing a line. Now, since it's a greater than, I'm going to use a dotted line to connect the points. Like so. And then furthermore, since it's greater than, that tells me I shade above the line, so this graph would look like the following. So there's your first example. Y is greater than 2/3 x plus 4. We're going to do a similar example, but now you're going to see we're going to change the inequality symbol to a less than or equal to. So while I erase this example, think in your head, what should be a rough sketch, or what is this graph going to roughly look like as we prepare to go through the second example. So as you are preparing your rough sketch, I hope you realize that since it's less than or equal to, that means I'm going to be using a solid line, and since it's less than, I'm going to be shading below the line in this case. So now I just have to derive the points that make up this line. My y-intercept is -3, so I'm going to go down 3. And then my slope is 1/2, that is up 1 over 2, up 1 over 2. In this case, I'm going to be using a solid line. Again, solid line because it was an equal to. And I'm going to be shading below. And as you can see, you don't have to get carried away with the shading. right? That is suffice as long as we can make an approximation of where the shading will actually take place. All right, so now those are two examples such that the equation's already in slope-intercept form. Now, this equation's in standard form. So what we're going to need to do first is solve this for y to put it into slope-intercept form. Again, as I prepare the surface to go through this example, what I want you to think about is when solving an inequality, I have to remember that whenever I divide both sides by negative, something special happens. So think about what that something special is while we prepare. Alright, so we're in standard form. I need to solve this equation for y. So my first step is simply to subtract 3x to both sides. That's going to leave me with negative 2y greater than negative 3x plus 4. Now, this next step, dividing by negative 2, hopefully you remembered that whenever I divide both sides by a negative, the inequality symbol gets flipped. Negative 3 divided by negative 2 is a positive 3/2. Positive 4 divided by negative 2 is negative 2. So now we have a problem that's in slope-intercept form. I'll graph the y-intercept of negative 2. The slope is 3/2. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Since it's less than, I use a dotted line. And again, since it's less than, I'll shade below. So, this presentation was instructions on how to graph linear inequalities. Remember, there's two additional steps that we have. We have to determine what type of line we will use and whether or not we're going to shade above or below the line.